Now, Fed Chief Ben Bernanke said today that the economic outlook was inherently uncertain. This after dismal reports on housing and manufacturing this week. Still, Bernanke downplayed the odds of another recession. So, what is going on here? Well, to help me make sense of all this, I'm joined by Chief Economist of John Thomas International, Mike Norman. Good to see you, Mike. So, Bernanke vowed to quote-unquote take appropriate and effective responses in order to spur economic growth. What does that mean, though? What are these responses that he's referring to?
You got me, Adina. I'm starting to see Bernanke as more of an impediment to a recovery than really somebody who can help bring one along. First of all, the Fed has already engineered rates down to historically low levels. And we're seeing that this is not a recession that we're in as a result of high interest rates that need to come down. I mean, rates are very, very low now. We're experiencing an acute shortage of demand. And low interest rates, and it should be apparent to him by now, are not stimulating any demand to lift the economy back up. But Bernanke said something in his statement today that was truly astonishing. He said that fiscal policy can only support or sustain the economy temporarily. This is coming from a guy who has a PhD in economics from Princeton. He ought to know that government spending and investing is the second biggest component in GDP. It's the second biggest component in our economy. It's almost twice as big as business investment. So absolutely, fiscal policy is not only has the ability to sustain the economy, but it is the only option we have at this point. So for him to say, that it could only work in a temporary fashion, he, in effect, has bought into this prevailing, viewpoint that we cannot engage fiscal policy for whatever reason, an ideology. And therefore, he has become a major obstacle to any economic rebound. And unfortunately, that means more hard times ahead for most Americans.
Maybe he should have consulted with you, Mike, before he gave that speech. Now, it's interesting because he actually spoke just hours after the Commerce Department downgraded its estimate of second quarter gross domestic product growth, which could indicate that the economy is close to slipping back into recession. So what gives here?
If this is a recovery, Dina, this is a terrible recovery, because any recovery historically that we have seen off of a severe contraction, we would have been growing at 5 or 6% annualized rate. Now we're only growing at 1.6%. So clearly something needs to be done. And interest rate policy, monetary policy is not going to get the job done. And the longer we sit back and sort of hope and pray that the economy somehow manages to pull itself up off the floor through some rebound, like Bernanke said, you got to have a rebound in consumer spending and business investment. But the obvious question is, how are you going to get a rebound in consumer spending when you have a 10% unemployment rate, something like 20 million people out of work or underemployed? It's just not going to happen. And, the policies that are being proposed now turn America into this export nation. If it ever occurs, that's years down the road, and it would require a very dramatic devaluation of the dollar, which effectively reduces our standard of living. It's really awful to see somebody in a leadership position like Bernanke, who obviously knows the truth. You see, he's being very disingenuous about this because he knows that government spending and investment is a large component of GDP. But for him to come out there openly, and so many people listen to what he says and take it as the gospel, the economic gospel, for him to say that basically there's not a whole lot we can do, that's an abrogation of his responsibility. I think he's being dishonest and disingenuous. And again, a lot of people are going to have to go through much more hardship as a result of really a failure of economic leadership.
Mike, before I let you go very briefly, let's talk a little bit about the Federal Reserve Board seeking to delay the court-ordered release of documents identifying banks that might have failed without the bailout, which, while it's actually considering an appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court. What is going on here? Very briefly, Mike.
Well, the Fed is trying to protect in some sense its anonymity. However, the Fed is authorized under the Federal Reserve Act to lend money to whomever it deems, that is necessary. So it is within its authority to do what it did, and I think it's just trying to protect the identities of certain banks or financial institutions. And by the way, any commercial bank automatically under the Federal Reserve Act has a line into the Fed's discount window. So I think all this is, a whole lot about nothing, frankly.
The word transparency comes to mind with question marks all around it. Mike Norman, Chief Economist at John Thomas Financial, thanks so much for your time today.